All right, there we go. And let's see here. Welcome all. Please continue to share with us in the chat what you love about summer. We're so glad that you're here. We want to welcome you to the Washington Women's Foundation Philanthropy Learning Series. This session is titled A Critical Lens on Donor-Advised Funds. My name is Catherine, and I'm the Events and Programs Manager here at the Washington Women's Foundation, and we're delighted to see you today. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered here on a stolen and unceded Indigenous homeland, and in the context of broken treaties and unresolved harms to Native peoples. We are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, and of the Coast Salish, the Stillaguamish, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish, who have made and continue to make their homes here around the Salish Sea. We recognize as well that we live in a nation of wealth, a wealth created by the subjugation and exploitation of African peoples brought to this land through chattel slavery. We honor and uplift the original Indigenous stewards of this land and the forced contributions from generations of Africans. This is an acknowledgement of stolen land and stolen labor, and a recognition that the impact of these wrongs reverberates into our present day. Our acknowledgement does not replace authentic relationships, but serves only as a first small step in honoring with gratitude the land on which we live. We're so glad that you're here and that you're excited to learn with us today. Before we get started, we have a quick poll to kind of gauge our interest in donor-advised funds, and I'll just launch that poll. So feel free to let us know, what is your experience with donor-advised funds? Great. We've got all a range of experience with donor-advised funds. Love this. We'll spend a few more seconds with this poll. All right, I will go ahead and end that poll and let's share the results. So we have we're really split here. This is great to see. Can everyone see this? Okay, great. We have about 12% who are starting out with donor-advised funds. We have about 41% who are on the verge of opening. And 6% who have one and want to use it more effectively, and a good percentage of people who have a DAF and actively engage with it. So thank you for sharing your answers on that. And I am so excited to hand this over to my amazing colleague, Aviva, who will lovingly moderate our conversation today.
Thank you, Catherine. I am glad there's such a range of interest and experience with donor-advised funds. So thanks for doing that poll to help us set the grounding a little bit. Like Catherine said, my name is Aviva Stamfer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Grants and Programs Director here at Washington Women's Foundation, stepping into the moderator role in unexpected fashion. Stephanie, our incredible member and philanthropic leader, is out sick today, so we're sending her healing wishes, and we will continue on in the conversation with myself and Jen. Lem is also not able to join us today, so it'll be maybe a quicker conversation, and that might mean more time for your questions. Let's see, Catherine, do you want to pin Jen? And then we'll get started. And Jen, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and answer the question, what brings you to this work and why do you love it?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Risher, and I'm in San Francisco, which is the home of the Ohlone. And I use she, her pronouns. And I'm very honored to be here. What brings me to this work? I'll back way up because I used to live in Seattle. And when I was 25, I got super lucky. I joined Microsoft. I met my husband. He joined a small startup called Amazon, and suddenly I had more wealth than I could have imagined. And so what brings me to this work is a lot of thinking about that, struggling with it, wrestling with it, and writing a book about it. So I wrote a book that was published in September of 2020 called We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth. And since then, I've been talking with the goal of helping people move out of guilt and shame and a desire to keep their money hidden, trying to get people to look at their own money stories because all of us have a relationship with money, and to help people move into a sense of meaning and purpose with their money. And I've done that myself, kind of thinking about where our wealth is, what money means and the power it has. I've been really focused on investing in ways that can create a more equitable society, economically, racially, a gender equitable society. And I've also been looking very hard at kind of what philanthropy can do. And one of the things I discovered is how much money is sitting in donor advised funds. So I'll share more about that, obviously, but that's really what's brought me to the work that I do.
Thank you for sharing. And it's great to hear sort of the journey that life has taken you on. And we'll dive in a little bit more later on too. For folks who might not be familiar, it sounds like a lot of people on the call are, but just to level set, Jen, what is a donor advised fund?
What is a donor advised fund? So a donor advised fund, or often called a DAF, is a charitable vehicle. And it's when you open a donor advised fund, it's basically you're setting up a charitable checking account. So what happens is you put money into this donor advised fund. The money's then out of your control. It's sitting in this fund. You can't ever pull it back. It can grow in a donor advised fund tax-free, and there's no payout requirement. When you open a DAF, there are 3 types of DAFs that you can open. You can open a DAF as far as the DAF sponsor, so the people that kind of manage a DAF. There are the national DAF sponsors, the big guys like Fidelity and Schwab. And there are community foundations that have DAFs. So you can open a DAF at a community foundation, or there's single purpose DAFs, often around universities or religious affiliations. Catholic communities have DAFs. So there's many different sponsors that allow you to open a DAF. And why would you open a DAF? Well, it makes it easy. So it is like opening a charitable checking account. You get a tax benefit because you get your tax break up front, and the money goes in and you get that tax benefit. Then once the money's in your DAF, it really makes it easy to give because it's just like you can kind of dole it out. You can do that over time, and you can give money, but you could also give stock. So you can put stock and securities into a DAF and give those as well. DAFs also have there's a lot of creativity you can do within your DAF, and this is sort of new, but there's a lot of impact investments that you can make in a DAF. Like you can create you can give loans, you can invest in things through the DAF. The money always will come back into your DAF. It still won't come to you, but it's a good way to have impact. So there's a lot of power that a DAF has. And if you're a person who has a lot of money and you're thinking about opening a foundation or opening a DAF, DAFs are so much easier. It's really not a lot of administration on your part. But a DAF is not an end in and of itself. This is a key to note. Yes, opening the DAF is one thing. Then it allows you to give, but any money that's sitting in a DAF is really just money sitting on the sidelines. It's philanthropic dollars because it's gotten the tax break. And in fact, it's essentially money sitting in a tax shelter until you deploy it or until you activate it.
That's such a good distinction. And I really appreciate you outlining both some of the benefits and some of the limitations. Are there any other limitations that exist for this philanthropic tool that you think are worth outlining?
I think the key limitation I see, and the thing that I've been kind of working against, is that there's no payout requirement. So you put the money in, and the in the spirit of the DAF, you're to give it out over time, and a year, 2 years, when it's sitting in the DAF, it's really not doing anything. So the idea was to make it easy for people to give over time, but there is no payout requirement. So it can sit in a DAF for years. It can sit there forever. And in fact, when my husband and I started really looking into DAFs, it was in 2020, and we were just blown away by the fact that there was a lot more DAFs opened. There were so many more accounts. Initially, maybe 10 years ago, DAFs were really kind of very high end. You could only put in like $20,000 or more. People with more wealth were using DAFs. Now you can open a DAF with really any amount of money, but there's so much sitting there. And in 2020, there was $120 billion sitting in DAFs. And we're like, it's hard to get your head around that number. And we were thinking, like, how do you think about that? And we noticed that NASA's annual budget is $23 billion. So it's like 5 times NASA's annual budget sitting in DAFs. And the reason we were looking at this is because it was COVID, and there was so much need and so much uncertainty, and yet this money was just sitting on the sidelines. So we really wanted to inspire more giving. I have to say, it's not going in the right direction, because now the official number is $234 billion sitting in DAFs. So we need to make a difference. We need to make a change here.
Absolutely. I mean, those are striking figures. So thank you for sharing. I think it helps us understand sort of the scale of what we're talking about here. When we, charitable checking account is one thing, $200+ billion sitting on the sidelines is another. So we're kind of getting to this already, but I think this is a great time to ask you about Half My DAF and the initiative that you have started, and how it works, and maybe a little bit about how you took what you found when you were looking around and understanding the scope here and turned it into a force for change.
Sure. I'm thinking now that, as I've thrown out these big numbers, and maybe some of you already knew this, there's so much money there. A question that comes up is like, well, why aren't people moving the money, right? And I don't think it's nefarious. I think, there's individuals out there, they've put the money in, and so why aren't they moving it? And we've kind of found out that there are 4 basic reasons. And one reason is I forgot I had a DAF. So people will open their DAF. It might be their financial advisor comes to them and says, hey, this is a good year in terms of taxes for you to put some money. You're going to use it charitably. So it's a charitable dollars you're going to, eventually put to work, but this is a good year to do it. So you're reminded by your financial advisor to do this, and then no one reminds you again. So you can forget that it exists. So and people do, they forget that they have a DAF. 2 big reasons also are that people are working hard, they're busy, life's happening, they'll get to their philanthropy later. And this is pretty common. People kind of think, oh yeah, once I'm older, I'm going to do my philanthropy. And, really our answer to that is no, start now. Don't put it off. This is a muscle that you need to build. Start learning about giving. And it's not, you don't have to, study it and do a ton of research. And I think philanthropy has been so over intellectualized that people have a fear of getting it wrong. So, that happens too. Another thing that does happen is people want to give, they're ready to give, but they feel overwhelmed, and they are scared. This idea of being scared to get it wrong, or they can't figure out what to do or where to give. And you can't really get this wrong. I think my message to people is really look inside yourself. What do you care about? What are you passionate about? And then just start. Test it out, start giving and see how it feels, see what you're learning. And then the 4th reason, and this is a very human thing, if people have told us, well, if I give it away, then I don't have it anymore. it's, numbers that you can see that you have in your DAF, even though it's really not yours. And our answer to that is, we'll give half of it. You can still look at the other half. But thank you for the question about half my DAF. So when COVID hit, we're sheltering in place. My husband was running a nonprofit, so he could feel the funding, drying up, and there was so much uncertainty. And nonprofits were unable to hold their luncheons. They were unable to do anything in person. And they were working harder than ever. So our hearts just went out to nonprofits and thought, what can we do? So I was sort of doubling down on places I already supported, and extending those 3-year gifts I kind of was giving them sooner. But we wanted to do more, and we were just in our backyard thinking about what can we do? How can we kind of reach a lot of nonprofits? And then we also were very aware of this $120 billion at the time sitting in donor advised funds. And so we decided, hey, let's link these two things together. Let's encourage others to move money and put our money to work through matching other people. So we came up with the idea of half my DAF. So we said, anyone who has a donor advised fund and commits to halving their DAF, spending out half of the money in their donor advised fund by September 30th, 2020, you'll be eligible for a match from us. So we put up $1 million of our own money, and we said, we're going to match dollar for dollar up to $10,000. We're going to give all this away to anyone who's moving money. And so that first year, it was really quite exciting, because I hadn't really worked on something like this with my husband and wasn't sure how it was going to go. And yet it was really fun. We created a website. We started talking to people. We found partners to help us out. We kind of tapped into some connections that we had. We got amazing press, and the word got out. And so we launched it through Giving Tuesday, which happened in May that year. And from May 5th or whenever that was till September 30th, we moved $8.6 million through half my DAF. So it was very exciting. We had about 140 people join us, commit to halving their DAF. We had a couple people join us on the matching pool side. So in the end, we had $1.4 million to give away. And it was just very exciting. And we got such great feedback. I mean, the nonprofits were thrilled, donors were thrilled. And we heard over and over, this is the nudge I needed. This was what inspired me to actually move money. And it was so exciting for people to see the nonprofits they cared about getting matches. And we kind of stepped out. We did show our values by saying we won't match anything that is related to gun violence or hate speech. So we didn't find anything like that, but we matched any gift, and we randomly selected the matches. So it was very, very exciting. And then we had people saying, well, when you do this next year, and that hadn't really been our plan, but we actually thought this is really, who knows where this could go. And it was so powerful. And one of the key things that kind of got us to decide do it again the following year is our daughters. We had one daughter home who was helping us with the data entry, and another daughter who had just graduated from college. And they came together, they talked to each other, and they gave us, David and I, for Christmas, the gift of matching dollars from their own money. So they stepped up and they said, we want to join half my DAF. We want to give through half my DAF. Our older daughter said, I want all my money to go to racial justice issues. And our younger daughter said, I want all my money to go to climate and environment. And so that second year, we again said, we have $1 million to give away wherever you want to give, but we also had buckets of money for organizations. We had racial justice, climate and environment, education in underserved communities, and reproductive health. So we had those areas that we had extra money to give to. And now we're in year 4. We're about to give our first round of grants on next week. So far, since March 1st this year, $5 million has moved through half my DAF, which is very exciting. And I'll stop there. I really want to answer your questions. I've put a lot out there. So happy to answer questions.
Oh, it's so inspiring to think about, finding that one piece. You said, people said that's the one nudge I needed, and you were able to provide that and move serious dollars. So thank you for your work, Jen. It's really inspiring to hear about. And I'm sure there'll be questions from the audience to get into that a little more as well. I want to shift a little bit to thinking about some advice you might have for donors. You've engaged with donors for several years through Half My DAF. You have a sense, you have your own donor experience. I'm wondering about advice you have for donors who are looking to move away from a maybe more traditional DAF process or experience, maybe a little bit more extractive, towards this idea around regenerative giving. And I know that Lem was also going to share a little bit on this, but you can share your portion, and then maybe we can include some follow-up from Lem on this topic as well.
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I'm really a huge fan of the direction that I see philanthropy going, which is much more trust-based. So I'm a huge proponent of unrestricted multiple year gifts, trusting the people who are on the ground doing the work. When it comes to DAF sponsors, they're not all created equal. So there are the big guys, and there's another reason that so much money is sitting in donor advised funds, because of the system that's in place. So big DAF sponsors like Fidelity and Schwab and Vanguard are making a lot of money on the money sitting in the donor advised fund. So they're taking advantage of those donors who forget they have a DAF, because then they make money on the money sitting there. So they're not incentivized to actually move the money. And there's not a lot of transparency. You can give to anywhere through DAF. So there are incredible DAF sponsors out there, and Lem is the one that co-founded and is a CEO of a great one called Possibility Labs, and they're set up differently, and they have a mission to create a more just system for everybody. And they're very focused on racial justice. So they have a DAF that first of all, they require 10%, at least a 10% payout, and they have an incentive for you to pay more, because at 40% they waive the fee, and all the money that's sitting in their DAFs is invested in Black-owned banks. And if Lem pops on, he can tell you more about this, but I love their structure and the way they're doing things. But Half My DAF has recently partnered with Amalgamated, and Amalgamated is also a real leader in the DAF sponsor space. They were the first to create a no hate policy. So they will not give to anything hate related. They're very transparent. They also give at least, you have to move at least 10% out of their donor advised fund. And in fact, last year Amalgamated moved 75% of all their DAF dollars. So they really are aligned with our values. They're walking the walk. They're moving money. So it's very exciting. So those are the two I'd like to highlight, because I know them best. There are others out there that are doing good things. Tides, I think, has a DAF. So when you decide if you're going to open a DAF, pick a DAF sponsor that is going to help you, move that money, and that is aligned with your values.
Such good advice, and it's tangible and yet also really grounded in that larger vision for how you want to move your philanthropic dollars. You've touched on this already a bit, but I'm curious, at Washington Women's Foundation, we are really invested in bringing a racial equity lens and a gender identity equity lens to our grant making. And so we're curious to know what that might look like in the context of a DAF, excuse me. How do you integrate those principles when you're using a DAF? What does that look like for you? And if you want to share an example or talk more broadly, we'd love to hear both.
A DAF is a tool. So it really is just a pass-through tool, and it can be used any way you want to use it. So it really starts with you as a donor, how you want to move money, and if you want to move money that in a way that's not extractive, that is focused on racial equity, that's up to you. And moving that money through the DAF is one way to move that money. I have used my DAF. One of the things I think about when I think about my philanthropic dollars is it's, you know, your philanthropic dollars are one thing, but you have all your dollars are doing something. There's power and impact in everything that you're invested in and what you're doing with your money. And so I've started thinking about how my dollars that aren't necessarily philanthropic dollars can help in this space as well. How do I invest in ways that create a world that I want to live in? How do I invest in ways that you know, offer more opportunity for everyone? And I just want to throw out that, you know, women get 2% of venture capital dollars, and women of color get much less than that. So when white men are making most of the decisions on what gets invested in and what, you know, what products and services we're seeing, I think that's a huge problem. And so since the last few years, I've been investing with women of color who are fund managers, and I believe that it just makes social but also financial sense, because we need different perspectives and different people out there. So I want to see a variety of products from a lot of different perspectives and vantage points being invested in. And I'm doing some of that through my DAF. So I've done a couple of recoverable grants, one to Seed Commons, which invests in it offers loans for people who are unbanked and underbanked. And so I've put money through my DAF into a recoverable grant to them that's out there for, it's 8 years. I've put money into an organization that gives working capital to women. I've given a loan to a bridge loan through my DAF. So there's a lot of things you can do within a DAF with money that then will come back to the DAF that you can then give out again. And I've done a lot of kind of equity work there. But again, it's like not the DAF itself is really just the structure, and it's about what you want to do with your money and using that DAF tool in a way that you want to see your money used.
Thank you, Jen. I love the specific examples and also the encouragement to kind of bring it back to yourself as an individual and how you want to put your values into action. And the reminder that a DAF is a philanthropic tool, right? I mean, that's kind of core to this conversation. And the last question I have for you before we turn to audience questions is about philanthropic tools. You know, there's a lot of great change happening in the philanthropic sector, as you talked about with trust-based philanthropy. If you could reimagine philanthropic tools, what would that look like? We'd love to hear what's on your mind with that. Dream with us a little.
Yeah, well, I changed DAF. There's the ACE Act, which is Accelerate Charitable Efforts Act, is one way that people were trying to make change to kind of to create a payout requirement in DAFs. So the ACE Act had a 10-year payout requirement. It also took a look at foundations and tried to increase the amount, the 5% amount. I think a DAF can be a very powerful tool. I mean, anything that makes it easier to give, I think, is a powerful tool. I just think it has some limitations. So I'd like to see, you know, you put money in a DAF, and in 2 years, if it's not gone, then it moves out into the nonprofit space, something like that. I think when you say tools, it makes me think, you know, don't make sure that you know that you as a donor and as an individual can just give. I mean, and just there's nothing between you and making gifts and shifting power. And the more direct, the better in my mind. So if you don't have a DAF, writing a check is incredibly powerful, and making sure that it honors the work being done. I think we are very fortunate. I feel very privileged to be in a position where I can make a difference in such a small way, just by using money, where people are dedicating their lives to solving some of our society's biggest problems every day. They're working on, and so I'm honored always to be able to be part of that. And I trust that the work being done is, that I can help with the work being done.
Thank you. Yeah. And if we have time, maybe later, I would love to hear more about the ASECT. But I do want to turn to some audience questions. Thanks for putting them in the chat here. The first one from Crystal. Thank you, Crystal. Is it possible for someone to create a DAF and have two people, maybe friends, contribute to the DAF and grant out of it? So getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I don't see why not. Absolutely. So in fact, when we do Half My DAF, we've created a Half My DAF, which we feed money into. We have partners who then also feed their money into the Half My DAF. And then we match through that DAF. So that's what we're doing at Half My DAF. So absolutely, you can, and make sure you can name your DAF whatever you want, and make sure you do name it. I think often people don't put their, or it happens that you kind of skip through and you forget to put your name, and then that makes it really tricky for nonprofits. We hear over and over again that nonprofits are saying, I get this check from Fidelity and I'm not sure who the donor is, or I get a check from a community foundation, there's no donor. So you can call it the Jen, Mary, and Bob DAF or whatever you want to name it. And then it sounds, I love the idea of giving in community. So if you have friends that want to join you and you all pour money into a DAF together and give together, I think that can be very powerful. I think giving should be fun, and I think the more engaged and fun it is, the more you're going to do. So yeah, I think that's an amazing idea to open a DAF with friends.
I agree, Jen. And, we're just big fans of all things collective giving over here at Washington Women's Foundation, and do think it should be fun and something that's better to do in community. Great question, Crystal. Okay, Sophia has a question also on sort of the logistical side of things. For people who have existing DAFs, is it possible to move them to another manager more in line with one's values?
Here again, I can answer from experience. So we, for many years, were in Fidelity. And as I started learning more about the DAF space, I wanted to get out of Fidelity. I mean, they are a machine. They were able to, when we grant from during Half My DAF, we're granting, 350 gifts in a day. And so they just churn through that, and they have so it made it easy for us, but I don't like their policy, and I don't like the fact that they aren't really stepping up in a way that I think they should be. So we moved money from our Fidelity DAF to our amalgamated DAF. From the DAF, you can give from DAF to DAF, you can foundations, and I think this is part of why there's so much money right now sitting in DAFs. Foundations can give to DAFs. And here's another thing that bothers me is foundations can give to DAFs, and thinking charitably, they're doing it just temporarily to then give it out. But when a foundation gives to a DAF, that money actually is counted in the 5% of the money they have to give away. That's another change I'd make, because that shouldn't count. It doesn't count. You're not giving until it actually reaches the people in need or the people doing the work. Doesn't count till, gets to a 501c3, even though I guess a DAF is a 501c3. Anyway, yes, the answer is yes, you can move from one DAF to another, and from foundation to DAF.
I think that's good insight too. A great answer and good insight into sort of some of the interesting loopholes.
Interesting, yes. There is a article that I was quoted in, but it was about Fidelity, and it's named as the largest charity of the United States because it is a 501c3, and that just drives me crazy.
And I think you shared that with Catherine and I, and it's a really good article. We can include it in the follow-up because it's just striking. There's some really great conversation in the chat here around nudging more dollars out to charities, and some of the the percentages of dollar DAF balances being distributed. And then a good conversation about sort of, starting a DAF because of being on the edge of itemization for taxes as a way to bundle a few years of charitable giving in 1 year for tax purposes. It kind of ties into what you were saying about some of the many reasons someone might use a DAF and have that work for them. I'm not seeing more questions in the chat. Melissa, thank you for raising your hand. Would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Hi, yes. First of all, just a huge thanks to the Washington Women's Foundation for having this conversation, and to you, Jen, for being such a leader in this area. Maybe just to kind of give a brief bit of background, since it seems like we have a little bit of time, but I'm working with an organization called Panorama Global. It's based in Seattle. I'm also a member of Washington Women's Foundation, and a huge fan of really giving to community-based organizations. What I am doing partially in my work is thinking about what can we learn. We've been managing cohorts of McKinsey Scott grant recipients over the past couple of years, and have talked to a lot of organizations about just how they've been able to use the funding and what they would like to see from funders moving forward, and what they've learned from the experience. And we have a lot of information to share, and I'm trying to take that and package it and share it with funders. And this is my question is, there's all sorts of different kinds of funders, and I've been looking at segmentation, and DAF holders are becoming kind of a huge segment, and I would include community foundations in that. There's so much money, as you pointed out, just sitting in these DAFs. As I've been kind of digging into the details around how payouts are calculated, it's probably a lot, payouts are actually less than we think based on how they're being calculated. And the numbers of DAFs opening and people putting money into DAFs just continues to explode. So my question is, why aren't more people talking about this? And what can we do to kind of stimulate the conversation and make sure that we're all collectively supporting a movement to get some of that money that's just sitting there that people even forget about, that needs to be put to use?
Yes, and yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, and thank you for the work. I'm very curious to hear what you're thinking, how you're thinking about sharing information about to your funders about the gifts that they're getting from McKinsey Scott. That seems fascinating. How do we, I mean, that's what we're doing. My husband and I really want to raise the awareness. That's what Half My DAF is partly all about, of like raising the awareness, making sure people are like, it's clicking with people. Yeah, we need to spread the word. And thank you for being here. That's one thing. That's why I'm here. I want to spread the word. I want people to know that this is an issue. I also want people to get giving and to inspire. I mean, I think it's better with a carrot than a stick. So that's why we're trying to inspire people with matches and spread the word the best we can. It's getting articles written and politically lobbying. That's what the ACE Act is about, really lobbying for bills to be passed that kind of change the way DAFs are the payout requirement in particular. I mean, it's a great question, and it's just like spreading the word. I don't know. And that's why we're keeping, when we kind of rallied for around year 4, I was like, oh, wow, are we going to keep doing this? I'm like, yeah, we have to. It's just like these things take time. Movements take time. So let people know about Half My DAF, and make sure nonprofits know about it, because then they can spread the word to their donors. I mean, that's what we found initially. We thought, oh, we're going to partner with a DAF sponsor, and we recognized that they didn't really want to move money. And so then we thought, well, we have donor partners, but we've really found that educating and talking to nonprofits about DAFs, getting them to talk to their donors. So it's like that ripple effect happening. Because it's such a win for a nonprofit. They get to have that communication with a donor, they get a grant, and then they get a possible match.
Great question and great answer. Thank you both. Yeah, I mean, and for what it's worth, I feel like we put this panel together, and then Catherine and I were looking around and seeing lots of other similar conversations happening in the philanthropic space. So it makes me hopeful that this is becoming more of a conversation. And if you just talk about DAFs everywhere you go. All right, let's gonna just check in the chat here, see if there's any more questions. Someone is sharing appreciation for your suggestions on the website, Jen, the Half My DAF instructions, which is wonderful. Any other questions for folks for Jen here from folks in the audience? And definitely feel free to come off mute and chime in. I can also ask a question while you think of, formulate what's burning in your head. And my question would really be sort of, if you were to recommend one action step for everyone in the audience today, Jen, what would that look like? And do you have any, I'm sure you have lots of action steps, so you could share a couple ideas, but what would that be for you?
Move your money, put it to work. Don't let it sit there. Do it now. Really, it's this sort of, DAFs, like you mentioned, Melissa, they're having this heyday. Everyone's like, oh, I want to open a DAF. How can I use my DAF? And thinking about it. It's like a DAF. I just want to remind people, it's just a tool. It really comes down to you as a donor and as someone who wants to make a change or wants to solve a problem or wants to, support an organization. You've got to make that move. And it's all about like taking action and doing it now. And I guess, take that action, move your money, and then get to know the organization. I think the more involved you can become in something, kind of the more you can help and the more engaged. It just is this kind of snowball effect. I guess it's just too simple. It really is, money, problem, how that's part of solving the problem. There's so much good work being done, and it just really upsets me to know how hard nonprofits have to work for every, dollar that they are granted. It's like a constant effort. And if they don't have to make effort to steward their donors and talk their, and prove themselves, they can put their energy to work on solving problems rather than trying to gain money so that they can solve problems. So the more you can kind of let the nonprofit do the work they're doing, the better.
Couldn't agree more, Jen. I love it. And I love the encouragement. A follow-on question here from Melissa. Thank you. About nonprofits. I've found smaller nonprofits aren't as knowledgeable about DAFs. What can we do to support nonprofits in understanding how to work with DAFs?
Yeah, that's true. Dave and I started doing webinars for nonprofits, just talking through like what is a DAF and how it works, and and talking about those checks that arrive, and how do you find out who the donor is, and keeping. For nonprofits, we always say keep track of your DAF donors, and it's okay to ask people, are you giving through a DAF? You can probably tell because they're getting a check. But track your DAF donors. Those people probably have more resources. They're probably going to, give back. So it's important to keep track of them. Make it, and again, it's like, what makes it easiest to give? Like there's a DAF widget you can put on all your communication for a nonprofit that allows people. I find it myself, if people, suggest a check or a credit card, those things are cumbersome for me. They're cumbersome for a nonprofit that often has to pay a fee for the credit card. So easy to give people a way to give through their DAF. And when I can give through a DAF rather than write a check or use my credit card, I'll give more because I have money sitting there. So the easier you can make it for donors to give to you from their DAF, the better. And yeah, it is a problem for smaller community-based foundations. There's community-based nonprofits. I support a couple of them, and they don't have DAF donors. They're like, we're just scrappy, and we don't have. yeah. And how do you access that money? Yeah, that's a problem. How do you access the big donor? It's a big question.
A very big question. And Lisa actually just put into the chat here a link to another workshop on that very topic, helping nonprofits tap into DAF. So I know I'll definitely check that out after the call. Another question here from Cedra. Do you have other recommendations about how to support legislative changes on DAF and foundation payout rules? Thinking about advocacy over here.
It is, that's what we need to do. Biden recently, a couple months ago, was saying we need to do something about DAFs. And he was pointing to the fact that foundations are giving to DAFs, and that counts as their 5%. So it's out there. I mean, there's some knowledge, and the ACE Act is a little bit stuck. It's not getting moved through. So it's unfortunate. I know there's a group called the Patriotic Millionaires, and they're very focused on tax reform and tax code, and they're working on these types of things. It's political advocacy groups and policy change groups. I'm not knowledgeable in that area, but I know that it's a key. I mean, Half My DAF is kind of the ground, like grassroots on the ground, like we're trying to get people to understand the issue, but I do think policy change is really needed, and that's what's going to make a big difference. Making sure that there is a payout requirement, and it just kills me that 5% is kind of the benchmark now, because foundations 5%, that's nothing. They're making more money on the money sitting in the foundation than they're giving away. This is also another, I can put my other hat on and just say, this is a huge problem. And again, I think that's a policy change issue as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for the great question, Cedra. I think I might move towards closing. Catherine, I'm looking at you. It seems like we're kind of wrapping up here. If you do have more questions, pop them in. Before I turn it over to Catherine to close us out, I just want to again highlight the work of Possibility Labs. Our LEM was having internet issues, so I'm bummed because I know there's a lot of really great work to share that they're doing over there at Possibility Labs. So really encourage you to check out their website. We'll include it right there in the chat. Look at that. Catherine is on the same brain waves as me. They're just doing really great work, and highly encourage you to check it out, especially some of their theory of change work and some of that big picture. And I know that Jen, you are very familiar with their work and work with LEM over there as well. So with that, if there's not any more questions, I will turn it back over to Catherine or actually, before I do, Jen, is there any last thoughts that you want to share before I hand it back over to Catherine?
I've said a lot. I hope people don't have questions. If you do, please feel free to shout out questions. Check out our website, because it is really exciting and inspiring to see all the places that people have been giving. We've tracked from 2020 to 21. You can see all the different years, what people gave to, where we were able to match. We do 2 matches, one now, and then we do a second match in September. So I will say, if you know a donor or you're a nonprofit that you want, you can still be part of Half My DAF 2023 and be eligible for matches, because we're going to be giving away more money in September. And every grant you make is eligible for a match. It's completely blind. We put it into a spreadsheet and randomly match. So it's not too late to join Half My DAF, commit to moving half of the money out of your donor advised fund, start giving, and you'll be eligible for matches. And did you put it in there? Yeah, www.halfmydaf.com.
Perfect. And we'll put that in the follow-up email as well. Thank you so much, Jen, for all of your knowledge. It has been incredible to learn from you. And I'll hand it back to Catherine to wrap us up.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jen and Aviva. Thank you all for joining this conversation. Jen, for your wisdom, you are our inspiration, and for your advocacy, we so appreciate your work. Aviva, thank you for stepping in to guide this discussion. We really hope you all leave this session feeling inspired to move your money in a significant way to you, whether that be through a donor advised fund or through a different way. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next and last session of our philanthropy series in August, where we'll discuss donor perspectives on reparations. Okay, enjoy your summer days. Thank you.